Some betrayals cut so deep they change the very foundation of who you thought you were. Others reveal who people truly are when they think no one is watching. This is the story of how I discovered both truths in the same devastating moment, and how sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own actions. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, because today's story will remind you that grace under pressure can be the most powerful weapon of all. My name is Celeste Montgomery. I am 32 years old, and I live in Beacon Falls, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Connecticut, where everyone knows everyone else's business, except when it matters most. The kind of place where secrets hide behind perfectly manicured lawns and where family loyalty is supposed to mean something sacred. I never expected to become the villain in someone else's story, especially not in the story of a woman I had spent 8 years trying to please. But life has a way of teaching you that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the sharpest knives, waiting for the perfect moment to use them. It started on a Tuesday morning in October, when the maple leaves outside our Victorian home had turned the color of burnished copper, and the air carried that crisp promise of winter. I was in the kitchen, grinding beans for coffee, when my husband Marcus stumbled down the stairs looking pale and disoriented. At 35, he had always been the picture of health. Broad shoulders, kind hazel eyes, and a smile that could light up our entire street. But that morning, something was terribly wrong. "Celeste," he said, gripping the doorframe, "I can't seem to catch my breath." The next few hours blurred together like watercolors in rain. Emergency room, tests, more tests, words like cardiac episode, and stress-induced cardiomyopathy floating around us like threatening clouds. Marcus, my strong, dependable Marcus, was lying in a hospital bed with wires attached to his chest, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His mother, Patricia Wellington Barnes, arrived within the hour. She swept into the cardiac unit like she owned the place, all tailored blazer and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the emergency. Patricia had never liked me, though she had gotten quite skilled at hiding it behind thin smiles and backhanded compliments over the years. "How is my son?" she demanded, not bothering to acknowledge me standing right there beside his bed. "The doctors say he's stable," I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "I wasn't asking you, dear. I'll speak to the medical professionals. 8 years of marriage." And she still treated me like temporary help. Marcus was too weak to notice the slight, or maybe he was too used to his mother's behavior to see it anymore. I squeezed his hand and told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was going. To recover, the cardiologist, Dr. Reeves, explained that Marcus had experienced what they called broken heart syndrome. Ironically appropriate, given the circumstances that would unfold. The stress from his demanding job as a financial advisor, combined with some underlying genetic factors, had essentially caused his heart to temporarily malfunction. With proper treatment and lifestyle changes, he would make a full recovery. The key word being temporary, but for the next 3 weeks, Marcus was in and out of consciousness, his body fighting to heal itself while his mind drifted in a haze of medication and exhaustion. I barely left his side, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, surviving on cafeteria coffee and whatever Patricia occasionally brought from revenge treats, the little bakery downtown that made the most incredible lemon bars. She would arrive each morning with a small white box, though she never offered me any. "These are Marcus's favorites," she would say, as if I didn't already know that. As if I hadn't been the one introducing him to new flavors and treats for nearly a decade. During those long hospital days, I began to notice things. Whispered phone calls Patricia would make out in the hallway. The way she would study me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her pale blue eyes calculating something I couldn't quite understand. How she would immediately stop talking whenever I entered a room where she was speaking with Marcus's siblings, David and Rebecca. David was Patricia's golden child, successful, unmarried, and completely devoted to his mother's every whim. Rebecca was the baby, sweet but easily influenced, married to a man Patricia approved of because he came from what she called good stock. Then there was Marcus, the middle child who had disappointed his mother by choosing love over pedigree when he married me. I came from what Patricia considered humble beginnings. My father had been a high school English teacher, my mother a nurse, good, honest people who had raised me to believe that character mattered more than bank accounts. But to Patricia, I would always be the girl who wasn't quite enough for her son. You know? she said to me one afternoon while Marcus slept. I've been thinking about the future, about what's best for Marcus when he recovers. The way she said, when, instead of if, should have reassured me, but something in her tone made my stomach clench. What do you mean? Well, dear, you're both still so young. Perhaps this health scare is a sign that it's time to reassess priorities. Marcus has always been so impulsive with his decisions. Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward my wedding ring. Sometimes we make choices in our youth that don't serve us well in the long term. I felt the blood drain from my face. Patricia, Marcus, and I love each other. This illness doesn't change that. Of course, dear, I'm simply saying that people grow and change. What matters is what's best for the family. The way she emphasized family made it clear that in her mind, I wasn't really part of it. That conversation haunted me for days. I tried to dismiss it as the worried ramblings of a frightened mother, but the seed of unease had been planted. Patricia had always been controlling, but there was something different now. Something more purposeful in her coldness toward me. Marcus began to improve during his 4th week in the hospital. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery. Though they warned that it would take months of rehabilitation and lifestyle changes, he was awake more often, able to have real conversations, and his color was slowly returning. I felt like I could finally breathe again. It was during this period of cautious hope that Patricia made her move. I had gone home to shower and gather some fresh clothes, the first time I had left the hospital for more than an hour since Marcus's collapse. Our house felt strange and empty, filled with the echoes of our interrupted life. I was packing a bag when I heard Patricia's voice coming from Marcus's study downstairs. Yes, I understand the urgency, she was saying. My son is very ill, and we need to ensure that everything is properly arranged while he's still coherent enough to make decisions. I froze at the top of the stairs, my heart beginning to pound. Something about her tone, so different from the worried mother act. She put on in public sent warning bells through my entire system. The will needs to be updated immediately, she continued. I have the new provisions here with me. Yes, he'll sign today. Will. The word hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had updated his will when we got married, naming me as his primary beneficiary. It was a standard thing for married couples to do, barely worth discussing at the time. But now apparently it was worth discussing in secret phone calls. I crept down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and positioned myself where I could hear better without being seen. No, she won't be there. I've made sure of that. Marcus is still quite weak from the medication, and I think we can all agree that clarity of mind is essential for such important decisions. Patricia's laugh was sharp and cold. Trust me, by the time she returns, everything will be properly sorted. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys. I drove back to the hospital in a state of controlled panic, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. When I arrived at Marcus's room, I found Patricia sitting beside his bed with a stack of papers, and her family attorney, Robert Thornfield, a man I had met several times at family gatherings. Marcus looked up at me with confused, glassy eyes. The medication always made him drowsy in the afternoons, and Patricia had clearly timed this visit perfectly. Celeste, darling, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're back. Sooner than expected, Robert was just helping Marcus take care of some important paperwork. What kind of paperwork? I asked, though I already knew. Just some financial documents, Robert said smoothly. Nothing that concerns you directly, but I could see the will on the bedside table, could see Marcus's shaky signature at the bottom of the page, still wet. With ink, my husband had just signed away my future while barely conscious, manipulated by his own mother into believing it was the right thing to do. Marcus, I said, moving to his side. Are you feeling all right? You look confused. I'm fine, he mumbled, though his eyes kept drifting shut. Mother explained everything. It's all for the best. Patricia stood up, gathering the papers with efficient movements. Well, I think we've accomplished what we needed to today. Marcus should rest now. They left me sitting beside my husband's bed, watching him sleep, knowing that everything I thought I understood about my life had just shifted beneath my feet. The woman who had spent 8 years pretending to tolerate me had finally shown her hand, and she had played it perfectly. That night, I sat in the hospital chair and cried quietly, not wanting to wake Marcus. Not tears of sadness, exactly, but tears of rage and betrayal, and a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that came from years of trying to earn love from someone who had never intended to give it. But as the hours passed and my tears dried, something else began to take root in my chest. Not revenge, not in the traditional sense, but a crystalline clarity about who these people really were and what I was really dealing with. Patricia had made a mistake in showing me her true face so clearly. She had underestimated me, assuming that I would crumble under the weight of her manipulation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I asked to speak with Dr. Reeves privately. I explained my concerns about Marcus's mental state when he had signed the legal documents, about the medication's effects on his cognitive function, and about the pressure he might have been under from family members. Mrs. Montgomery, Dr. Reeves said, "Your husband is on several medications that can significantly impact decision-making abilities. Any legal documents signed during this period could certainly be challenged on the grounds of diminished capacity." I thanked him and asked for his professional opinion to be documented in Marcus's medical file. Then I called my own attorney, Sarah Chen, a brilliant woman who had helped us with our original estate planning. "Celeste, what Patricia did is legally questionable at best," Sarah said after I explained the situation. "If Marcus was under the influence of medication that impaired his judgment, that will could be invalidated. But more importantly, you need to think about what this means for your marriage." That was the question I had been avoiding. What did it mean that my husband, even in a compromised state, had been willing to cut me out of his will? What did it mean that he had listened to his mother's poison and found it believable enough to act upon? I decided to wait. Marcus was getting stronger every day, and soon he would be fully conscious and clear-headed. When that happened, I would have some very important conversations with my husband about trust, loyalty, and the kind of marriage we really had. 2 weeks later, Marcus came home. He was weak but lucid, more himself than he had been since the initial cardiac episode. I had been taking care of everything, coordinating with his doctors, managing his medications, handling the insurance paperwork, keeping our life running smoothly while he recovered. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said on his first night home, holding my hand as we sat on our front porch, watching the sunset. "You've been incredible through all of this, have I?" I asked quietly. He looked at me with confusion. "Of course, Celeste. You've been by my side every single day. You've been perfect. Then why did you sign me out of your will?" The color drained from his face so quickly, I was afraid he might have another cardiac episode. "What are you talking about?" 3 weeks ago, while you were heavily medicated, your mother brought her attorney to the hospital. You signed a new will, Marcus, one that removes me as your beneficiary and names David as your primary heir instead. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. I don't remember that. I was so confused those first few weeks. Everything was blurry, but surely I wouldn't have..." He trailed off, the reality of what he had done settling over him like a dark cloud. "You did. Your mother convinced you. It was for the best. She told you that young people make impulsive decisions that don't serve them well in the long term." Marcus closed his eyes, and I could see the moment when he remembered. The shame and horror that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know about his true feelings. "Oh God, Celeste, I'm so sorry I wasn't thinking clearly," Mother said. "She made it sound like I was protecting you somehow, like the inheritance would be a burden you didn't want." His voice broke. "I would never deliberately hurt you like that. But you did hurt me like that. You may not have intended it, but the result is the same. Your mother manipulated you into betraying me, and part of you must have believed her arguments made sense, or even medication wouldn't have made you sign those papers." We talked late into the night, and slowly, painfully, the truth emerged. Patricia had spent years planting small seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind about our marriage. Nothing dramatic. Nothing he could point to as obviously wrong, but a steady drip of subtle suggestions that I was too different from their family, that I didn't really understand their values, that perhaps he had married too young to know what he really wanted. "She made it sound like she was protecting both of us," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like giving you the inheritance would put pressure on you that wouldn't be fair, like it would change you into someone you weren't meant to be." "And you believed her?" I was scared and confused and barely conscious. But yes, part of me believed her, and I will never forgive myself for that. The apology was sincere, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. But apologies don't erase betrayal, and remorse doesn't undo broken trust. I needed time to think about what I wanted our future to look like, and more importantly, I needed to understand what Patricia's true endgame had been. The answer came sooner than I expected. A week later, David called Marcus with exciting news. He had been approached by a developer who wanted to purchase the family's ancestral property in Vermont, a sprawling estate that had been in the Wellington family for generations. The offer was substantial, enough to set up all of Patricia's children for life, but it required unanimous agreement from all heirs. The thing is, David explained during Sunday dinner at Patricia's house, the legal ownership is a bit complicated. The property was left to you, Marcus, but with the recent changes to your will, things are much simpler now. We can move forward without any complications. I sat quietly at the dinner table, invisible, as always, but suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't about protecting Marcus or ensuring the family legacy. This was about money. Specifically, it was about ensuring that I couldn't complicate a lucrative property sale by asserting any legal rights as Marcus's wife. Patricia had orchestrated Marcus's illness scare into an opportunity to secure her family's financial future, and I had been the only obstacle standing in her way. By convincing Marcus to change his will while he was vulnerable, she had eliminated any claim I might have had to the Vermont property. It was brilliantly calculated and absolutely ruthless. That's wonderful, I said, speaking up for the first time during the conversation. But I'm curious about the timeline. When exactly did this developer approach you, David? He looked uncomfortable. Well, it's been in the works for a while. These things take time to develop. How long is a while? Patricia cleared her throat. Celeste, dear, this really isn't your concern. This is family business. I am family, I said quietly. I've been family for 8 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled away gently. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something much more dangerous. I was calm. You know what? I said, standing up from the table. I think I need some fresh air, Marcus. I'll meet you at home. I drove straight to Sarah Chen's office. Even though it was Sunday evening, I called her emergency line and asked her to meet me there. Sarah, I need to understand something about property law. If someone manipulates a vulnerable person into changing their will specifically to facilitate a property sale, what legal recourse is available? She raised an eyebrow. That sounds like fraud, potentially elder abuse, and definitely grounds for invalidating the will. Why? I told her everything. About the property sale, about the timing of Patricia's manipulation, about the coordinated effort to exclude me from what was clearly a long-planned financial transaction. Celeste, this is bigger than just the will. If we can prove that Patricia knowingly manipulated Marcus while he was medically compromised in order to benefit financially, she could face serious legal consequences, and the will would absolutely be invalidated. I don't want to destroy his family, I said. I just want them to understand that their actions have consequences. Sarah smiled. Sometimes the most effective consequences are the ones people create for themselves. Monday morning, I asked Marcus to drive with me to Sarah's office. I had already explained what I had discovered about the property sale and its connection to his mother's sudden urgency about changing his will. I want you to understand something, I told him as we sat in Sarah's conference room. I'm not doing this to hurt your family. I'm doing this because your family needs to understand that manipulating vulnerable people has consequences, and because you deserve to make your own decisions with a clear mind. Sarah explained that Marcus could revoke the will he had signed under duress and create a new one that reflected his true wishes. She also explained that the previous will could be legally challenged on multiple grounds, which would create complications for any property sales that depended on its validity. Marcus signed the revocation papers immediately. Then he did something I hadn't expected. I want to create a new will, he said, but this time I want to add some specific provisions. He left me everything, as originally planned. But he also included a detailed clause explaining that any family member who had participated in manipulating him during his illness would be excluded from any inheritance whatsoever. It was legally airtight and emotionally devastating. Are you sure about this? I asked, Once David and Rebecca understand what this means for the property sale, there's no going back. They made their choice when they went along with Mother's plan. Marcus said, "Now I'm making mine." The phone call to David was short and brutal. When Marcus explained that the will Patricia had orchestrated was being legally challenged, and that a new will had been created specifically excluding family members who had participated in the manipulation, David's reaction was exactly what we had expected. "You can't do this. That property sale is supposed to secure everyone's future." "Everyone's future except Celeste's, apparently," Marcus replied. "You all decided she didn't matter when you thought I might die. Now you get to live with the consequences of that decision," Patricia called within the hour, her voice icy with controlled rage. "Marcus, you're making a terrible mistake. That girl has poisoned you against your own family." "No, Mother. You poisoned yourself against my wife, and then you tried to use my illness to exclude her from our life permanently. The mistake was mine, for not seeing clearly what kind of person you really are. Everything I did was to protect you. Everything you did was to protect a property sale that you've apparently been planning for months. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" The silence on the other end of the line told us everything we needed to know. The property sale fell through within 2 weeks, without unanimous agreement from all potential heirs, and with a legal challenge to the most recent will. The developer withdrew their offer rather than risk getting tangled up in a family dispute that could take years to resolve. David was furious. Rebecca was devastated. Patricia was coldly, lethally angry, but Marcus was free. For the first time in our marriage, I saw him stand up to his mother completely. He didn't back down when she cried, didn't apologize when she raged, didn't compromise when she tried to negotiate. He simply held firm to his boundaries and let her face the natural consequences of her choices. "You know," he said to me one evening as we sat on our porch again, watching another sunset, "I think I spent so many years trying to keep peace in my family that I forgot what it felt like to actually live by my values. And what does it feel like? Like freedom. Like I can finally breathe." The rehabilitation took months, but Marcus made a full recovery. Physically, he was stronger than he had been before his illness. Emotionally, he was a different person, more decisive, more self-aware, more willing to prioritize our marriage over his mother's approval. Patricia tried several times to reconcile, but her apologies always came with conditions and justifications. She never quite managed to understand that manipulating someone during a medical crisis wasn't something you could explain away or minimize. She had shown us who she really was, and we had chosen to believe her. The family split was painful, but necessary. David and Rebecca eventually reached out to Marcus separately, apologizing for their part in their mother's scheme. He forgave them, but made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time and genuine change in how they treated me. I realize now that I let Mother's attitude toward Celeste influence me more than I should have, Rebecca admitted during one difficult conversation. "I never stood up for her because it was easier to go along with what Mother wanted. That was cowardly of me. It was a start." 6 months after Marcus's recovery, we decided to sell our house in Beacon Falls and move somewhere fresh. Somewhere without the weight of old family dynamics and painful memories. We chose a small coastal town in Maine, where the air was clean and the future felt full of possibilities. On our last day in Connecticut, I stopped by Revenge Treats to buy some of their lemon bars. Not because Patricia had introduced us to them, but because I had genuinely grown to love them during those long hospital days. They represented something sweet surviving in the midst of something bitter, moving away, asked Janet, the bakery owner, as she packed up my order. "New adventures," I said simply. "Well, sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what we need to see things clearly." She was more right than she knew. As Marcus and I drove north toward our new life, I thought about the nature of revenge. I had wanted to make Patricia pay for what she had done, wanted her to understand the pain she had caused, wanted justice for the betrayal and manipulation. In the end, I got all of that without having to actively seek revenge at all. Patricia had created her own consequences through her choices. She had damaged her relationship with her son irreparably, cost her family a fortune in the lost property sale, and revealed herself to be exactly the kind of person who would manipulate a sick man for financial gain. The sweetest part wasn't that she had been punished. It was that she had been revealed. Everyone who mattered now knew exactly who Patricia Wellington Barnes really was beneath the polished exterior. She would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of her life, and so would everyone else in her social circle. Do you ever regret how everything turned out? Marcus asked as we crossed the state line into Maine. I considered the question seriously. We had lost his family, sold our home, and started over completely. It would have been easier to stay quiet, to accept Patricia's manipulation, to let the property sale go through and pretend nothing had happened. No, I said finally. Because now I know that when everything falls apart, you choose me. When your family pressures you to abandon me, you choose me. When money and manipulation and medical crises threaten to tear us apart, you still choose me. Every time, he said firmly. For the rest of my life, every time. That evening, we sat on the deck of our new home, watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. The house was smaller than our place in Beacon Falls, simpler, but it felt like ours in a way that our old life never quite had. You know what the strangest part is? Marcus said. I think my heart attack might have been the best thing that ever happened to us. How do you figure? Because it forced everything into the light, all the family dynamics I had been ignoring, all the ways I had been failing you. Without realizing it, all the toxic patterns that were slowly poisoning our marriage. It all became impossible to ignore when everything was stripped down to what really mattered. He was right. The crisis had revealed not just Patricia's true nature, but the strength of our bond when it wasn't being undermined by external pressure. It had shown us both what we were willing to fight for and what we were willing to sacrifice to protect it. Besides, he added with a smile, now we know that even when I'm unconscious and drugged, part of me is still stupid enough to listen. To my mother, we can plan around that character flaw going forward. I laughed, and it felt good to laugh about something that had once caused such pain. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Sometimes it's letting people face the natural consequences of their actions, and sometimes it's discovering that the person you married is actually the person you thought they were, even when they temporarily forget it themselves. Patricia Wellington Barnes had tried to write me out of her family's story. Instead, she had written herself out of our lives, and we were better for it, as I drifted off to sleep that night in our new home, with the sound of ocean waves outside our window and my husband's steady breathing beside me. I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not destruction or dramatic confrontation, but peace. Not revenge, but resolution. Not winning at someone else's expense, but winning back your own life. The woman who had once made me feel small and unwelcome had become irrelevant to my happiness. She had no power over my future, no influence on my marriage, and no ability to make me doubt my worth. That more than any deliberate act of revenge was the sweetest victory of all. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone in facing family manipulation can make all the difference in finding the strength to choose your own happiness over keeping the peace.